Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a beer from Burial Beer Company. I've reviewed many of their beers over the years, but it's been a while since I've had one. The specific beer is called The Beginning is After the End, and it's a coffee porter that clocks in at 6.5% ABV. Burial Beer Company is based in Asheville, North Carolina. So starting with label art on this one, it's pretty cool. It looks like it has a puma, presumably with blood or, I don't know, maybe even coffee porter dripping out of its mouth. But it's a pretty cool looking label. All right, so we're gonna get this cracked, pour it right in the old porter glass here, gently. All right. See how this looks as I pour it. Okay, typical porter color, a dark brown. Also quite active in terms of carbonation. That's very typical for a porter. I don't expect this to form or hold a super great head. Porters typically don't. They are very active in terms of carbonation. You can already see this one immediately dropping. Visually, it's very dark brown. It's not pitch black, as is typical for a porter. And I can absolutely see a ton of carbonation activity working on this one. It's just going crazy. Small and kind of medium bubbles. I don't see anything super large, but as we can see, it's already basically dropped that head. Porters are best if you can get them off of a tap. Every once in a while, you go to a bar that has them on a nitro, and that's always a blessing. But it's rare. But nonetheless, this looks great. Let's give it a sniff. Oh, wow, yeah. Okay, so that coffee is really prevalent on the nose. Really comes out very strongly. Smells like a deep, dark roast, like a pungent, good volume of beans that they used in this beer. You can also smell the typical underlying malt bill that you'll get on a porter. There's a slight kind of fruitiness to it, which is very prototypical. You don't get it in all porters, but it's very much the norm, and that's true here. Now, part of that could be coming from the malt bill. Part of it could be coming from the specific type of coffee bean that they used, but nonetheless, it smells really nice. It smells very roasty, very malty, and the coffee comes through very, very clearly. So it looks the part, smells great. Head's out of the way, it is what it is. Let's just jump right in and see how this one tastes. Ooh. Yeah, that's nice. That's a nice porter. That's a very nice coffee porter. Okay. So before I get into the flavor profile here, let's talk about the body and the mouthfeel. The body on this is a true medium. It's a 6.5%. That's higher than your average porter. Not crazy higher, but it's higher. It's not an imperial, but it's a good ABV for a porter. In terms of the mouthfeel, very, very silky smooth when you agitate around the palate. You can feel the resistance. It's got a natural bit of resistance to it, but it gets so silky creamy as you start to agitate it. It gets even thicker on the palate. It feels quite nice. With a nice medium body, it feels right. It feels right on the mouth in terms of weight and texture. Very, very nice feeling beer. So, first thing on first sip, the very first thing that hit me was that slight fruitiness that I was picking up on the nose that's prevalent in the flavor. And it doesn't taste like some porters where there's these kind of funky off flavors and like raisin-like. It's nothing like that. It's almost like pitted cherries or something like that. Like there's this almost cherry-like quality, which easily could be coming from the coffee bean variety that they used, because that is a trait that some coffee beans do have. I have not really ever had any deeply roasted malts that I thought tasted of cherry, but that's kind of where I got first. And then this coffee opens up immediately behind it within the first couple of seconds. And it slowly builds, builds, builds. It's really one of the beers where it's not like a big ramp up. It's more like a slow blooming effect. And it opens up to the intensity of its flavor profile. And the coffee on this is really nice. It's it reminds me of like a good dark roast house blend that's been made with a lot of coffee. Like they were not shy about getting plenty of beans in there in the grounds before they made the pot. It's a deep, intense roast, and it tastes fantastic. A really, really nice prototypical coffee flavor. Nothing funky, no like tropical fruit or acidic or kind of citrus kind of overtones. It's just a nice, earthy, roasty coffee. that pairs so well with this malt bill. It's absolutely delicious. I love a good porter. I love a good coffee porter. This is both, and this one is well done. So I'm going to jump back in. I'm going to get a second sip, let the flavors re-intensify, see if there's anything that I missed, and then we'll talk about the finish. Great beer. Gets so thick. Yep. Little burst of fruitiness, cherries. Yeah, it's cherry. Nothing else. It's cherry. I taste cherry. There's even a slight tartness on some of the cherry flavor that comes through. So not just tasting of actual cherries, but like tart cherries as well. It's really nice, very enjoyable. That coffee just keeps opening and opening and opening. That's binding with the deep, rich roast to the malt. So there's a lot of earthiness, a lot of roastiness. There's actually even though it just tastes like a big, rich, bold house blend, I think some of the malts that were used in here were roasted far more deeply than the coffee, because I don't taste like coffee deeply roasted like an Italian or a French roast, more like a dark to medium dark roast. But what I am tasting is an intensity of char. Not smoky, but intensity of char, like the malts were deeply roasted for a very long time. That's coming through, and it's mixing with this coffee that they put in there, and it's absolutely delicious. So this is a very nice and interesting porter. You get these bright, fresh kind of cherry flavors, and then this kind of tart burst that comes behind it. And then the coffee slowly starts to blossom open, and then the malt bill starts to open behind that kind of dovetail. Then they all mix together. After the earthiness from the malt bill, the roastiness, the char from the malt bill, and the coffee kind of build and blend together and hit the peak of their intensity, the subtle fruitiness that you get on the front, well, it's really not subtle, but the fruitiness that you get on front, the cherries in particular, they really get out of the way. And it really becomes a story of deep, rich, roasty malt, earthiness, and char, and coffee. And it's absolutely delicious. Very, very nice beer. Very well done. Tastes absolutely fantastic. So, the finish. This is longer than your average porter. To be expected, it's got coffee in it. And they were not shy about it. This is a higher than average ABV, so it's got more malt in it than your average porter. And then the addition of coffee is also going to help the cause. So yeah, it's got a longer than average finish for a porter, certainly in this kind of middle ABV range by a long shot. It's definitely longer. What lingers on the back of the palate is coffee and char and that earthy undersense. So it's just this roasty, earthy, charry kind of undercurrent of the malt bill plus the coffee. And it just lingers both on the back of the palate and kind of still on the front of the palate, the very kind of tip front part of the tongue and on the very back. That's where it still lingers, and it's quite long. I mean, quite long. This is actually longer than many Imperials that I've had in this range. But yeah, really impressive beer. Absolutely delicious. I'm going to take my time, sip on this one, call up my scores. When we come back, we'll get this one ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. This was Burial Beer Company's The Beginning is After the End, a coffee porter clocking in at 6.5% ABV. Burial Beer Company is based in Asheville, North Carolina. So starting with the aroma, this was very much what I would expect for a coffee porter. A little higher ABV than your average, and no, it's not an Imperial, just 6.5, but definitely on the higher end of what you might see in a typical porter. So the aroma really was prevalent with the coffee that they put in here. There were also some slight fruit kind of aromas that came out of the beer, which really smelled quite nice. And you could smell the classic underpinnings of a traditional porter malt bill. Overall, it was above average in terms of pungency. It smelled fantastic. The aroma gets an 8 out of 10. For the taste, I absolutely love the taste on this. Very unexpected with this bright burst of cherry up front. In fact, that came even before the coffee did. And then this tart cherry behind it was really unique. I've never had a beer like this that had these kind of flavor compounds that came through, but it was absolutely fantastic. The coffee that they put in there was a really nice deep roast mixed with these underlying slight char and earthiness and general roasty quality of the malt bill, absolutely fantastic. The taste gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the body, this was definitely higher ABV than your average porter, and it definitely had a heavier body than your average porter. Overall, it was significantly above average. Body gets a 9 out of 10. For the mouthfeel, mouthfeel on this one was really, really nice. Definitely different than your average porter. You'll be able to feel a little resistance depending on the ABV, but this was definitely markedly noticeable, and this one got quite a bit thicker than your average porter would upon agitation on the palate. It really paired with that heavier than average body quite well. Mouthfeel does get a 10 out of 10. For the finish, this was another category that really took me by surprise. I love a coffee porter, but 6.5, it's not imperial, no barrel aging. I didn't expect it to get quite as much mileage out of each sip, but it was really just that pungency of the coffee and the malt bill that just kept lingering and lingering and lingering long after each sip. Not only just on the back of the palate, but even on the front, which you don't often get in a beer. Finish was fantastic. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the head and retention, porters are all over the board. This was one of the more active porters in terms of carbonation, and despite its best efforts, it really only formed a head at the very beginning upon heavy agitation and very quickly dissipated to basically nothing. Really low end of average. It gets a 3 out of 10. For the appearance, this was classic porter, not pitch black, but very, very dark. It gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer was top tier. The malts that they chose, the interesting combination of malts that they used, the level of roast of those, and in particular, the specific type of coffee or coffees that they used really all pulled this whole beer together. For me, the coffee was just this really nice bonus on a very very well made traditional porter, and it really all played very, very well together. Come back to those interesting cherry notes. That's not something you get often in a beer unless it actually has some kind of cherry added. That was very unexpected, a very nice kind of cherry on top, pun intended. And then the underlying roastiness of the malt bill, the coffee, how it all paired together, the balance was spot on. It's a perfect 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, I love a good coffee porter, and this one was top notch. It gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, it's an example of the style. So this beer did very well in most categories, just lost a few in a handful, notably in the head and retention, but you can't really hold that against a porter. It's very typical of the style, and in the grand scheme of things, I thought this was an excellent, very, very good example of what a coffee porter can and should be. I give it perfect 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Burial Beer Company's The Beginning is After the End to a 90 out of 100. This is top tier porter. If you're a fan of porters, coffee beers, coffee porters, coffee stouts, maybe you don't drink a lot of porters, this is one definitely worth your time to seek. Yes, it's lower ABV. That just means maybe you can have a couple instead of one imperial. Absolutely worth it. Very, very good beer with some interesting traits that you don't find in most beers. This one, I definitely highly recommend. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on your notifications, hit that bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.